and to the NGO representatives, as well as to the distinguished delegation of the Holy See. I would like to extend a warm welcome to His Excellency Monsignor Silvano Tomasi, who is the permanent representative of the UN Observer of the Holy See. And I'd also like to extend that same warm welcome to his delegation. It's a great honour and privilege to have you here with us at this committee again following a 14-year absence. We believe that your presence here shows the goodwill which the Holy See exhibits as a state party to the convention. And we welcome your willingness to renew your links with this committee here today. We will be looking here at the periodic reports from the 16th to 23rd reports, in fact. And we will proceed as follows. Monsignor, your distinguished delegation will have 30 to 45 minutes to introduce the report, and we will then give the floor to the country rapporteur, which on this occasion is Mr. Vasquez. He will have 20 minutes in which to analyse the report on the Holy See. We will then give the floor to the other committee members who wish to participate, and they will have 5 to 7 minutes of speaking time each. If there's time at the end of the afternoon and the delegation agrees, there may be time for preliminary responses to the questions and comments to be offered. But of course, if you prefer, you can wait until tomorrow to give those responses and comments. Tomorrow, we'll meet again with the delegation of the Holy See, and we'll begin with an hour to an hour and a quarter for the delegation to offer its responses and comments to the questions asked today. We'll then move on to what our committee has termed an interactive dialogue. And that will be an opportunity for 2 colleagues from the committee to take the floor to make further questions and comments, after which you can answer and make any other comments which you might have. At the end of tomorrow's session, we hope that we'll have 10 or 15 minutes for the country rapporteur to introduce his preliminary recommendations. Your Excellency, you'll also have 5 to 10 minutes to make your concluding remarks. And that will bring our review of these reports to a close. So that's the plan for today and tomorrow. Without further ado then, I give the floor to His Excellency Monsignor Tomasi so that you can introduce the report on the Holy See. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chairperson, dear members of the committee, allow me, first of all, to extend cordial greetings to all the members of the committee and the Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. In particular, I thank Mr. Francisco Calizay, Chairperson of this committee, and Mr. Carlos Manuel Vasquez, who had the important task of studying the report of the Holy See, which we are to consider here this afternoon and tomorrow. I would also like to introduce the members of our delegation. In addition to myself, the delegation is comprised of Monsignor Christopher L. Cassis and Professor Vincenzo Bonomo, the Secretariat of State of the Holy See, Father Joseph Kunam Parampil of the Holy See Department for the Evangelization of the Peoples, and Monsignor Richard Gira, Secretary of the Holy See Mission in Geneva. My delegation is particularly pleased to be able to present the report of the Holy See before this committee, especially as we are at the threshold of the 50th anniversary of the adoption of by the General Assembly of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination on December 21st, 1965. It is worth remembering that the Holy See was one of the first signatories to the Convention on November 21, 1966, followed by the ratification on May 1, 1969. The Holy See is also grateful to the committee for providing a list of themes that may be discussed in this interactive dialogue and which have been taken into consideration in the preparation of this presentation. Fundamental principles. For the Holy See, becoming a state party to the Convention is much more than a symbolic gesture. It is a manifestation of the solid conviction that racial discrimination is absolutely intolerable because all persons share in the same human dignity and thus enjoy the same fundamental and inviolable human rights. Indeed, there is a great convergence between the fundamental principles of the Convention with those basic tenets that the Holy See promotes, especially respect for the inherent human dignity of every human person, regardless of race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin. The Holy See takes this opportunity to outline the basic principles of its position, largely set out in paragraph 44 of the report, which have served to evaluate whether the making of a distinction in certain situations may amount to discrimination. The Holy See, relying upon the teaching of the Catholic Church, maintains that all members of the human race are equal in inherent dignity, because their dignity is grounded in the image and likeness of God, and the common rational nature shared by all humans as persons. The Holy See also maintains that right and duties flow from this inherent dignity. This equality, however, does not mean that all people are alike in all ways. What matters is, in fact, the respect of the dignity of every person. As Pope Francis states in the special meeting with the Gypsies, the time has come to put an end to age-old prejudices, preconceptions, and mutual mistrust that are often at the base of discrimination, racism, and xenophobia. No one must feel isolated, and no one is authorized to trample on the dignity and rights of others. The Holy See, Vatican City State, and the Catholic Church. At the outset of this presentation, I wish to make an important distinction of definition among the entities of the Holy See, the Catholic Church, and the Vatican City State, because these terms are often interchanged as if they signify one and the same reality. The Holy See, as a member of the international community, is related but separate and distinct from the territory of Vatican City-State, over which it exercises sovereignty. Its international personality has never been confused with the territories over which it has exercised state sovereignty. In its present form, Vatican City-State was established in 1929 to ensure more effectively the absolute and visible independence of the Holy See, and to guarantee its indisputable sovereignty for the accomplishment of its worldwide moral, spiritual, and religious mission, including all actions related to international relations. Indeed, following the end of the Papal States in 1870 until the establishment of Vatican City-State in 1929, the Holy See continued to act as a subject of international law by concluding concordats and international treaties with states, participating in international conferences, conducting mediation and arbitration missions, and maintaining both active and passive diplomatic relations. Therefore, colloquial references to the Holy See as the Vatican can be misleading. In this sense, the Holy See globally encourages basic principles and authentic human rights as recognized in the Convention, while implementing it within the territory of Vatican City-State. The Catholic Church, spread throughout the world, over which the Holy Father as Bishop of Rome exercises religious authority in accordance with canon law, is a spiritual society composed of those persons who by their own choice freely adhere to the doctrines, morals, sacraments, and discipline and religious practices proposed by the Catholic Church. It follows that the Holy See, while having religious authority over its members who reside in different countries, recognizes the jurisdiction of national authorities, where members of the Catholic Church are located or reside. The Holy See wishes therefore to reiterate unreservedly that the persons who live in a particular country are under the jurisdiction of the legitimate authorities of that country, and are thus subject to the domestic law and the consequences contained therein. State authorities are obligated to protect and, when necessary, prosecute persons under their jurisdiction. The Holy See exercises the same authority upon those who live in Vatican City-State in accordance with its laws. Hence, the Holy See, in respecting the principles of autonomy and sovereignty of states, insists that the state authority, which has legitimate competency, act as the responsible agent of justice in regard to crimes committed by persons under their jurisdiction. It should be stressed, particularly in light of much confusion, that the Holy See has no civil jurisdiction, as that term is understood in international law, over each and every member of the Catholic Church. My delegation wishes to emphasize that this includes not only those violations contained in the Convention, but also all other acts considered as crimes committed by any individual who, although a member of the Catholic Church, is subject to a particular state authority. The obligation and responsibility of promoting justice in these cases reside with the competent domestic jurisdiction. Overview of the report. With these important distinctions in mind, I wish to give briefly an overview of the combined report 1623 of the Holy See that was consigned to the committee in June 2014. It is important to note that in preparation of the report, the following has been taken into account as much as possible. Given the unique nature of the Holy See, the guidelines regarding the form and content of the third specific report, the recommendations of the committee and the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination that concerned the previous report, and the concluding observations adopted by the committee on May 1, 2001. The report is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 gives a brief introduction. Part 2 responds to the questions the committee put to the Holy See in the committee's last concluding observations, in particular those regarding implementation of the Convention in Vatican City State. Finally, Part 3 provides information on the statements and the activities of the Holy See on the international level with regard to Articles 2.7 of the Convention. Moreover, I wish to highlight a number of aspects of the aforementioned combined report. In even greater conformity with Article 4 of the Convention, the new supplementary norms of the Vatican City State promulgated by Pope Francis on July 11, 2013, provide a very clear and strong piece of legislation for the elimination of racial discrimination and include a punishment of 5 to 10 years for those guilty of such crimes. These same supplementary norms, in particular Articles 13, 15, prohibit a vast array of crimes against humanity, including those addressing violations directly motivated by considerations of race in the description of the offense, such as apartheid, persecution, and genocide, imposing sentences of 30 to 35 years for those convicted. Such robust legislation manifests the importance of defending persons from actions that are fueled by racial bias and hatred, with a view to punish the perpetrators of such crimes. Indeed, beyond the implementation of such legislation within the territory of Vatican City State, the Holy See, in fulfilling its specific mission, which is of a religious and moral character, conveys the message behind these laws and the principles with which underlie them to members of the Catholic Church and to all persons of goodwill, thereby encouraging the mutual respect of all persons. The Holy See also uses its media services to promote the above-mentioned principles and to condemn racial discrimination. These media programs, articles, and statements, in turn, are translated into different languages and reproduced by numerous other media outlets throughout the world. For example, Vatican Radio, L'Osservatore Romano newspaper, Vatican Television Center, Vatican website, HolySee's press office, Daily Bulletin, Vatican Information Services, Vatican Publishing House, and Vatican News website. History shows that the truth that all men and women are created equal, with certain inalienable rights, must constantly be reaffirmed, reappropriated, and defended. Such a lofty principle should be embodied in social and political life to ensure the elimination of any form of racial discrimination. This moral appeal is universally applicable. For example, this appeal has been echoed in the numerous statements by national bishops' conferences, individual bishops and their dioceses, and in the pastoral work of many priests, religious, and lay people. One such example on the national level is the statement delivered by the President of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops during the recent racial tensions in that country. He says, "We join our voices with civic and religious leaders in pledging to work for healing and reconciliation. Our efforts must address root causes of these conflicts. A violent, sorrowful history of racial injustice, accompanied by a lack of educational, employment, and housing opportunities, has destroyed communities and broken down families, especially those who live in distressed urban communities. In the like manner, as noted in paragraph 36 of the report, other bishops' conferences have been instrumental in promoting racial harmony, especially by encouraging mutual respect and understanding, beginning with their educational institutions. The role of the Holy See in promoting reconciliation, tolerance, and friendship among nations and ethnic groups is not limited to moral exhortation. This is evident in the international activities that the Holy See carries out, as explained in its report. In addition, a concrete response to the above-mentioned exhortation is rendered visible in the work of local Catholic churches and institutions, in accordance with their own authority in canon law, and with respect for the laws of the countries in which they reside and operate. For example, consider the numerous schools which are run by religious communities and those in local parishes throughout the world. These schools, 215,784 globally, from kindergarten to universities, respecting applicable local, state, and national educational standards, educate well over 64 million young people. The majority of them are not Catholic. It is well known that for centuries, through its elementary and secondary schools, the Catholic Church has promoted the right of everyone, without distinction as to race, color, or national or ethnic origin, to equality and the enjoyment of the right to education and professional training. Furthermore, through the system of its educational institutions, the Catholic Church has been effective in combating prejudices which lead to racial discrimination. Another example is the system of health services managed by Catholics who provide care without any racial distinction. Worldwide, the Catholic Church operates 5,034 hospitals, more than 16,000 dispensaries, and 611 leprosy facilities. The sum of all the various welfare institutions operated by the Catholic Church globally reaches a total of 116,185. These institutions have sought to promote equality, mutual understanding, and peaceful coexistence among diverse ethnic and racial groups. In his video message on the occasion of the 2014 World Cup soccer tournament, the Holy Father stressed a culture of acceptance and tolerance. He said, "The final lesson for sports, which bear the fruits of peace, is the respect observed by our opponent. The secret to winning on the field and also in life is to respect my teammates and also my opponent. No one wins by himself, not on the field or in life. May no one isolate themselves or feel excluded. Be careful. No segregation, no racism. The Holy See would like to assure the committee that it has taken effective legislative, administrative, judicial, and other measures required under the Convention in Vatican City State. In addition, the Holy See has carried out different activities pursuant to its moral and spiritual mission within the international community so as to contribute to the prevention and elimination of racial discrimination, which is contrary to the inherent dignity of the human person. In line with the above, the Holy See assures this committee of its engagement to continue in good faith to implement and to promote the Convention for the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. Before closing, one point is worth underlining. As a state party to the Convention and to the 1969 Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, the Holy See wishes to underline that it has the right and the obligation to interpret the Convention in accordance with the rules of interpretation contained in the latter, and would expect the dialogue to remain within the specific area of concern of the Convention. My delegation believes, Mr. President, that the Holy See has fulfilled in good faith the treaty obligations assumed under the Convention as implemented in the laws of Vatican City State according to the particular and unique nature of this state. In conclusion, allow me to underscore the singular role the Holy See has played and will continue to play in advocating on a global level the values and all human rights that safeguard the inherent dignity of every person and which are a necessary component for friendly relations among peoples and peace in the world. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for having introduced to us the report of the Holy See. So, turning now to the country rapporteur, Mr. Vasquez. I'd like to ask colleagues who wish to take the floor after Mr. Vasquez to indicate to the Secretary of your intention to do so. And if I could just remind you that I'll be using this system of these two flags I am waving now. One is a red one is a yellow one. We were joking with the distinguished delegation from the Holy See just now that we all know the football rules that govern such matters. A yellow card is the first stage, and the red one is an indication that you absolutely must finish. So just to remind you, colleagues, you'll have between 5 and 7 minutes to put your questions and comments. So turning to Mr. Vasquez first, you have the floor.
Gracias, Presidente. I note with respect to the time that the delegation did not use all of its allocated minutes, and so I hope that those minutes will be reallocated to the country rapporteur. With that caveat, I'll try to remain within my time limit. I'd like to begin by offering a warm welcome to the delegation from the Holy See and thanking them for the report and their presence here today. It is always notable when the Holy See is before a UN treaty body, as it is not a party to very many human rights treaties. It's a particular pleasure for me to serve as rapporteur on this occasion. I will begin my comments by thanking the Holy See for the immensely valuable work it does to promote the aims of our convention. The state report discusses numerous statements made and other measures pursued by the Holy See to condemn racism, foster intercultural and interreligious understanding and tolerance, and to urge communities to be welcoming to refugees, among other important and pertinent matters. These include statements by Popes John Paul II, Benedict, and Francis, as well as the activities of various dicasteries of the Holy See, such as the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, the Pontifical Council for Culture, and the Congregation for Catholic Education. I could spend much of my 20 minutes elaborating on these activities, but that would not be a good use of my time. Instead, I will highlight a few that I consider most notable. First, Pope Francis stated at the Third Vatican Council, and I quote, "Racism today is the ultimate evil in the world." Elaborating on this theme, he stressed the importance of being welcoming to refugees. When we turn back the boats of African migrants seeking a better life, are we not like the innkeeper who told Mary and Joseph that there was no room for them and the infant Christ? These migrants are children of God, and we are commanded to love them. Pope Francis sounded a similar note in his speech before the joint session of the United States Congress. His voice on this issue is enormously important given the challenges the world faces today. I would also like to highlight Pope Francis's emphasis on the importance of fighting poverty. Indeed, he has made this a central focus of his papacy. I think it is appropriate to mention this point here because of the close connection in most parts of the world between poverty and racism. Sadly, in most countries of the world, the very poor are also the vulnerable racial and ethnic groups within the country. In the light of the intersectionality of poverty and racism, it is proper, in my view, for this committee to welcome the work of the Holy See and Pope Francis to call attention to and promote resolution of this problem. I will mention other valuable contributions of the Holy See in the worldwide fight to eliminate racial discrimination in the course of my remarks, but now I would like to proceed to examine the State Party's report. First, I note, as our chair mentioned, that it has been 14 years since we last reviewed the Holy See. We hope that the State Party will in the future be more timely in submitting its reports. Next, I would like to the preliminary comments the State Party's report regarding the mandate of this committee and how it has exercised its mandate. Paragraph 3 of the report offers some observations on the proper approach to interpreting the convention according to the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, and concludes that the Holy See would be justified in terminating or withdrawing from the treaty or suspending its operation in light of some of the recommendations the committee has made in the past. It seems to me, however, that the Holy See's position is contradictory. This is because, in the same paragraph, the Holy See notes that Article 9, subparagraph 2 of the Convention was an essential basis of the Holy See's intent to be bound by the Convention, and Article 9.2, according to the Holy See, limits the competence of the committee to the rendering of, quote, mere proposals of a non-binding nature in the form of suggestions and general recommendations. It is worth noting, however, that if indeed the committee's recommendations are mere proposals of a non-binding nature, the conclusion reached by the Holy See that it would be justified in withdrawing because of fundamental change in circumstance would not be warranted. The Holy See complains that the committee's proposals add new terminology or create new obligations which would constitute an unforeseen and fundamental change of circumstances that would justify its withdrawal from the treaty. But if this committee's recommendations are, as I said, not as the Holy See mentions, non-binding suggestions, they cannot create new obligations and could not constitute a fundamental change in circumstances. As to whether this committee has exceeded its mandate, I would comment that, as the Holy See points out, the Convention empowers the committee to make recommendations and make suggestions and general recommendations based on the examination of the reports and information received from state parties. As we often note in our dialogues with state parties, when we examine reports and release concluding observations, we do not always function as a tribunal, declaring states to be in violation or in compliance with the Convention. Our role is not merely to alert state parties when we believe they are in breach of the obligations imposed by the Convention. Consistent with the textual mandate to make suggestions and recommendations, we also seek to provide guidance regarding steps that, in our view, would improve protection against racial discrimination and advance the goals of eliminating such discrimination. Thus, we commonly recommend, for example, that state parties make the declaration contemplated by Article 14 regarding individual communications, or that state parties ratify other human rights treaties with a connection to our convention. These are suggestions and recommendations that we think will promote achievement of the aims of the convention, even though no one would claim that those are obligations of state parties under our convention. We do, of course, sometimes conclude that certain measures are required by the convention or that certain acts or omissions violate the convention, but our role is not limited to that. Much of what we recommend can be regarded as instead setting forth best practices under the convention. From this perspective, I would like to comment on paragraph 5 of the State Party Report, which objects to some of our general recommendations, such as those recognizing the intersection between the elimination of racial discrimination and the protection of some other human rights, as well as our request for information regarding the State Party's plans regarding the implementation of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action. As noted, we are charged by the convention to make suggestions and recommendations regarding measures that, in our view, would promote the aim of eliminating racial discrimination. Since the convention's text assigns us that role, it is difficult to maintain, we think, that the referenced general recommendations exceed our mandate. It is one thing for a state party to disagree with and decline to follow those recommendations, although we hope that they will be followed and expect that they will be given serious consideration. But I do not agree with the report's implication that the committee has gone beyond its mandate in making the recommendations in the first place. Next, I would like to address a cross-cutting issue that the Holy See has raised in its responses to the recent concluding observations of the Committee on the Rights of the Child and the Committee Against Torture, the territorial scope of the convention. With respect to the CRC and CAT, the Holy See took the position that its obligations under those conventions extend only to the territory of Vatican City State. This position was based in part on the Holy See's interpretive declaration to those conventions, which stated that the obligations assumed upon adherence of the convention were fulfilled solely through implementation of the aforementioned duties within the territory of Vatican City State, on whose behalf the Holy See became a party. The Holy See also relied on the text of certain provisions of those conventions, which impose duties to take certain measures with respect to any territory under its jurisdiction. As I read the State Party's report, the Holy See does not take that position in the position that our convention is similarly limited in its territorial scope. Although the remarks this afternoon may put that proposition into doubt, and I would welcome clarification from the State Party on this point. Such a position, in any event, would not be well-founded. The Holy See did not attach an interpretive declaration to its ratification of our convention. The convention was not expressly ratified on behalf of Vatican City State. Even though Vatican City State is a party to some international treaties, it was the Holy See, not Vatican City State, that became a party to our convention. As noted in the State Party report, the Holy See is a sovereign subject of international law having an original, non-derived legal personality independent of any authority or jurisdiction. Even though the Holy See exercises sovereignty over the territory of the Vatican City State, the State report points out that the international personality of the Holy See has never been confused with that of the territories over which it has exercised state sovereignty. Indeed, the report makes clear that the Holy See's territorial sovereignty over Vatican City State is a means to ensure the Holy See's absolute and evident independence and sovereignty for the accomplishment of its worldwide moral, spiritual, and religious mission. Accordingly, when the Holy See ratifies a treaty, it also manifests its moral authority and encourages states to accomplish the treaty's obligations. Second, the provisions of the convention do not contain an express territorial limitation, with the exception of Articles 3 and 6. Article 3, concerning segregation and apartheid, obligates states parties to prevent, prohibit, and eradicate all practices of this nature in territories under their jurisdiction. Article 6 requires states parties to assure effective remedies to everyone within their jurisdiction. But the other articles of the convention do not contain a territorial limitation and cannot reasonably be interpreted to be subject to one. Article 1 requires state parties to condemn racial discrimination. Article 2 requires state parties to pursue a policy of eliminating racial discrimination and engage in no act of racial discrimination. It is difficult to maintain, for example, that states parties reserve the right to engage in acts of racial discrimination beyond their borders. Determining which extraterritorial acts are attributable to the state party is, of course, a separate question. Nor is there a territorial limitation to Article 7's obligation to combat prejudices and promote understanding and tolerance in the fields of education, culture, and information. Consistent with this understanding of the convention's scope, the State Party report provides information about the statements of Popes John Paul II, Benedict, and Francis concerning the Rwandan genocide, as well as about the activities of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Rwanda. More generally, the report provides information about activities undertaken to promote the aims of the convention by the Supreme Pontiff, as well as various dicasteries of the Roman Curia. Some of these activities were performed outside the territory of Vatican City State, including the statement by the president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops mentioned in the presentation this afternoon. More importantly, these activities were not solely focused on eliminating racial discrimination within the 0.44 square kilometers of the Vatican City State. They were aimed at eliminating racial discrimination throughout the wider world. As I've already mentioned, these activities are highly commendable. My point at present is that this information appears to acknowledge that the convention implicates activities of the Holy See beyond its limited territorial jurisdiction. My remarks, therefore, will not be limited to the Holy See's activities, only insofar as they relate to the territory of Vatican City State. I will proceed with some questions regarding the laws recently promulgated to implement the Holy See's obligations under the Convention to penalize certain acts. The report refers to Law Number 8, Supplementary Norms on Criminal Matters, promulgated on July 11, 2013. Article 1 concerns racial discrimination and seems to track our convention closely. The definition of racial discrimination in Section 1 comes straight out of Article 1 of our convention. Sections 2, 3, and 4, penalizing certain acts, tracks Article 4 of our convention very closely. However, although the creation of or participation in a racist organization is penalized, the organization itself is not declared invalid, as contemplated by Article 4. Are there other provisions that accomplish this? The law provides that a person who performs these acts is punished with 5 to 10 years imprisonment. Perhaps this is an issue of translation, but this formulation suggests a lack of discretion to punish for less than 5 years or to decide against criminal prosecution. Is there, in fact, prosecutorial discretion concerning these offenses? In this connection, I call attention to the State Party. I call the State Party's attention to General Recommendation 35 on combating racist hate speech, which provides, in connection with hate speech offenses, that the criminalization of forms of racist expression should be reserved for serious cases to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, while less serious cases should be addressed by means other than the criminal law. Concerning the territorial scope of the criminal law, we understand that it applies when the offense is committed within the territory of Vatican City State, as well as to acts by public officials of the state acting abroad. I would like to ask, does this mean public officials of Vatican City State, or does it also include officials of the Holy See? The law also applies to citizens acting abroad, but only if the penalty specified is more than 2 years imprisonment. Are all officials of the Holy See citizens of Vatican City State? If so, then this would reduce the possible gap in coverage to which I referred a moment ago, but only with respect to crimes involving providing for a penalty of more than 2 years. A gap would remain for crimes subject to a penalty of less than 2 years. Regarding the obligation under Article 6 to ensure effective remedies, the State Party report notes in paragraph 26 that the penal laws allow access to just and adequate compensation for any damage suffered. I would appreciate further information on how the victims of racial discrimination may obtain compensation through the operation of the criminal law. One possible concern is that the burden of proof in criminal proceedings is very high. Evidence establishing guilt beyond a reasonable doubt is required. In civil proceedings, on the other hand, the burden of proof is usually lower. Indeed, we recommend that states shift the burden of proof to the defendant once the complainant has made out a prima facie case. Are complainants seeking compensation held to a lower burden of proof even though their contentious proceeding is part of a penal case? I have reviewed Canons 1729 to 1731, but they do not answer my question. It is not clear to me that the complainant is subject to a lower burden of proof, or if the burden shifts to the defendant at any point. Also potentially of concern is that apparently the availability of a remedy depends on the decision of a government official to initiate criminal proceedings. Canon 1731 provides that the judge can proceed with the request for compensation even if the defendant has been acquitted, but it does seem to require that a criminal proceeding be initiated before the person harmed may initiate a claim for compensation. This is a concern because it places the victim's right to compensation at the mercy of the prosecutor. Presumably, a prosecutor will not initiate a penal action if the evidence is not sufficient to prove defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Is this, in fact, how the remedial system operates? I also have a concern that the ability to bring a contentious action attached to a criminal prosecution may not afford a remedy in all of the circumstances contemplated by Article 6. Canon 1729 provides that a contentious action may be brought by a person who has suffered harm from a criminal offense. The criminal offenses addressed by Law Number 8 relate to the dissemination of ideas of racial discrimination and incitement to discrimination or racial violence or creation or participation in a racist organization. Law Number 8 does not criminalize racial discrimination itself. This is consistent with the text of Article 4 of the Convention, which does not require the criminalization of racial discrimination as such. But Article 6 does require the state to provide effective remedies for racial discrimination. If the only remedies available under the applicable law are those which may be claimed in conjunction with a criminal proceeding, and if the criminal law does not criminalize racial discrimination, then the law does not comply with Article 6. I would appreciate further information on how the laws concerning remedies operate in this respect. I will now shift to some broader concerns. First, I would like to raise a question about whether the racial or ethnic makeup of the leadership of the Holy See reflects the racial and ethnic diversity of the Catholic faithful. This issue was raised in the previous discussion when the Holy See was before this committee in 2001, and according to the summary record, the delegation indicated that data on the relevant categories of ethnicity would be provided with regard to the Vatican's governing structure. However, the data is not provided in the state's report. Data provided by an NGO provides some cause for concern. Currently, more than half of the 219 cardinals are from Europe, even though only about a quarter of the Catholic faithful are from Europe. Only 12% of cardinals are from South America, even though approximately 28% of the Catholic faithful come from that continent. It is, of course, important and noteworthy that the current Pope is from Latin America, and we do recognize that Pope Francis has made additional appointments in the last 2 years that were intended to and do increase the diversity of the College of Cardinals. However, Europeans do continue to be overrepresented in the college. In any event, we would again request data concerning not just the nationality of cardinals, but also their race and ethnicity. We would like to know whether the extent to which cardinals come from races and ethnicities that are minorities within their respective regions, while being majorities among the Catholic faithful in those regions. We would also welcome such data concerning the leadership of the Holy See in addition to cardinals, and if possible, about bishops and archbishops, which we understand are appointed by the Holy See. Next, I would like to address the Holy See's activities in the sphere of education. Article 7 stresses the importance of education in the fight against racial discrimination. The State Party report describes the many activities of the Holy See focusing on education and inculcating values of tolerance and respect for the dignity of all human beings. This includes the activities of the dicasteries, including the Congregation for Catholic Education, including recent guidance directed to all persons who have educational responsibilities in Catholic schools regarding the overcoming of discrimination in multicultural societies. We have received information from NGOs about the valuable work that Catholic schools perform in various countries in educating underserved minorities. In our examination of other states parties, we have sometimes found that Catholic schools are often more protective of the rights of non-Catholic minorities than the public schools. For example, in some countries, the wearing of religious symbols in the public schools is prohibited while it is permitted in the Catholic schools. All of this is commendable from our perspective. However, we have come across reports of racial discrimination within some Catholic schools. In this connection, we would appreciate further information about the sorts of training that is provided to teachers and administrators of Catholic educational institutions. We would also appreciate information regarding specific efforts by the Holy See seeking to prevent such discrimination. In asking for this information, I do not want to be understood as advocating top-down regulation of Catholic educational institutions by the Holy See, far from it. I understand that most of these institutions have substantial independence, and as a professor at a Catholic university, I can say that we value our independence and academic freedom. At the same time, in some countries, governmental efforts to tackle problems at religious institutions sometimes confront defenses based on freedom of religion. In such circumstances, lacuna may exist in the protection against discrimination. For this reason, it is proper to inquire about corrective mechanisms that may exist other than those provided by the governments in which these institutions operate. Next, I would like to raise some issues communicated to us by NGOs representing indigenous peoples in the United States and Mexico. I know that some colleagues will raise these issues as well, so I will be brief. First, the shadow report we received strenuously objects to the failure of the Holy See to explicitly disavow the papal bull titled Inter Caetera from the year 1493, which was clearly racist at its core and caused untold injuries to the indigenous peoples of the Americas that continue to be felt today. I would welcome further information from the delegation on this question. The report also strongly objects to the recent canonization of Junípero Serra, the Spanish missionary, because of his role in abuses against indigenous peoples in the Americas, as well as to the failure of the Holy See to consult with affected indigenous peoples in the process leading up to the canonization. While we welcome Pope Francis's apology to indigenous peoples in his speech delivered in Bolivia, these two concerns, among others raised in the shadow report, suggest that more may need to be done, including greater dialogue between the Holy See and indigenous peoples regarding their legitimate concerns. In our list of themes, we requested further information regarding several apparent violations of the convention involving the Catholic Church. The first relates to racism among Catholic clergy in the UK. In one case, a priest refused to baptize the child of an unmarried Afro-descendant couple, saying that you people believe in babies outside of marriage and then expect me to christen them. In another case, a priest refused to perform a requiem mass because the family requested to sing a Caribbean song. In another case, a priest stated that he would refuse refugees in his presbytery because everything of value would be gone in 5 minutes. Relatedly, there appears to be a severe underrepresentation of Afro-descendants among priests in the UK. Out of 5,600 priests in England and Wales, only 30 are black. We also requested information about discrimination against Catholic Dalits in India, including segregated cemeteries in Catholic churches. We would be interested in further information about mechanisms that may exist within the Holy See to address these issues. Specifically, what is the role, if any, of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in receiving and addressing complaints of acts of racial discrimination by clergy? I would like to add here a request for information concerning a priest implicated in the Rwandan genocide. This was a major topic of discussion in the last review of the Holy See, and much of the state report responds to questions raised regarding Rwanda. I would just like to ask specifically the question about the current situation of Father Wenceslas, who apparently, who was convicted in absentia by the International Tribunal, but apparently is residing and acting as a priest openly in France, and according to information, is being protected by the Catholic Church. I would be interested in updated information on that situation. To be clear, we're not advocating interference by the Holy See in the domestic jurisdiction of countries in which Catholic institutions operate. But often concurrent ability to address these issues exists. Moreover, we doubt that the discrimination I have referred to is required by the laws of the countries in question, which are also parties to our convention. In requesting this information, I do not mean to be taking a position on whether these apparent violations of the convention are attributable to the Holy See. I recognize that the Catholic Church is very large and that the Holy See is not responsible for racist acts by Catholic priests acting in other countries. At the same time, it should be remembered that a state party's responsibility can be engaged if it fails to take appropriate measures to prevent or redress conduct of its citizens or others under its authority or control. For present purposes, it is not necessary to delve into the application of these principles to the incidents I have mentioned. As the state party notes in its report, the Holy See ratified our convention in part to manifest its moral authority and to encourage states to ratify the treaty and accomplish its objectives. As I mentioned at the outset, the many very important and valuable statements of the Pope and other officials of the Holy See on the importance of fighting racism and being welcoming to immigrants are highly commendable, and do indeed encourage states to accomplish the objectives of ICERT. However, racist conduct on the part of Catholic officials in various parts of the world serve to undermine this message. The committee is of the view that raising and addressing these issues in our dialogue could, at a minimum, help promote further efforts to address these problems and thus help better achieve the convention's objectives. Again, I'd like to thank the delegation, and I look forward to your answers. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vasquez, for your initial analysis of the report on the Holy See. We will now begin with the speakers list, and the first speaker is Mr. Abdonimov, to be followed by Ms. Quickly.
Gracias, Señor Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman.
And first of all, permit me just to greet the delegation, and just to congratulate the committee and the delegation as well for the reestablishment of the dialogue, although after 14 years. But I think it's very important just the dialogue between the delegation and the committee, in any case, to maintain good relationships and just to maintain the understanding of the developments in the field of the implementation of our convention. Me personally, I cooperate with the HolySee representative in the OSCE as I'm a personal representative of the acting chairperson of the OSCE in the field of struggle against racism and concentrating as well on the discrimination against Christians and members of other religions. And so we're cooperating in this field. I think it's an important way of doing. I'm very pleased just to mention that the HolySee ratified an amendment to the Article 8 of our convention, which is important for the committee for well functioning it. And I think it's a good deed, because especially taking into consideration that not many countries ratified this amendment. I'm very pleased. I would like just to thank Mr. Vasquez as a country rapporteur for his deep analysis and many interesting questions. He posed almost all questions that I had planned to ask. But anyway, there are certain questions. I'll try just to be very brief. First of all, just to clarify, because we understand the specificity of the HolySee as a sovereign state and as the head of the Catholic Church. And in this regard, if you don't mind, just to explain in which relations you are with the military order of St. John. I mean, just the which is just officially in Latin, which is called Supremos Ordo Militaris Hospitalis Sancti Ioannis, Hierosoli Mitani, Rodios et Militensis. It is also considered to be a sovereign. But as far as I know, the head, the Grand Master of the order, is also nominated as a cardinal, and as well the Constitution is the Constitution and the latest Constitution. All the constitutions of the order were approved by the Pope. And the last constitution in 1961 was also approved by the Pope. And so the canonical law is the law of this order as well. So from that point of view, just to understand what are the relationships and to what extent it's also just the jurisdiction of the HolySee as well extends to this military order. I support the question posed by Mr. Vasquez dealing with Apache. We received an information, but as well dealing with other indigenous peoples in both Americas and the northern and southern. We understand that it's a history and not today's deeds. But anyway, we know that in certain cases the HolySee made good gestures dealing with history as well. For example, there were apologies dealing with the Crusades, and as well we know that one of the actual saints of the Catholic Church, which is Jeanne d'Arc, who was punished as a heretic, but then later she was recognized as a saint person. So from that point of view, I think probably there are certain possibilities just to repair the historical injustice dealing with indigenous peoples. But Mr. Vasquez was brilliant in asking you about all this. I don't go further. And then the question about dealing with the so-called maybe Dalit, not exactly Dalit in India, but in certain African countries, there's people who are very close to Dalits in their perception by the local population. For example, in Nigeria, there is a people which is called Igbo or Ibo, and there is a group of which is very close to Dalits, original Dalits, which are untouchable, we may say so. And even inside, many of them are Christians, and even inside the church communities, they are not recognized as an equal people, which is just against any concept of Christianity, who are all equal before the Lord. So from that point of view, if there is any special programs just to overcome the situation, I know that in these Christian communities of Igbo, those people cannot be even just appointed or elected as wardens or monitors of the community, just to help the community to fulfill. And in the nearest future, they also won't be elected. So I think that probably it is necessary just to provide some help to people to understand it is not in compliance with the Christianity in general. But because they're Catholics, so that's why I pose the question to the HolySee. Thank you very much. That's all for the moment. I couldn't go further, just saving the time. Thank you very much. Gracias, señor presidente.
A usted, señor.
Thank you, Mr. Avtonomov, for your questions and comments. I now give the floor to Ms. Quickly, to be followed by Mr. Murillo Martinez.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I would like to join my colleagues in welcoming the HolySee, and also, I think, this afternoon in welcoming the contribution of the HolySee to the struggle against racism globally, in particular, as has already been mentioned by Carlos Vasquez, and may I take the opportunity to say that he's left us with very little to add. And thank you very much for that also. It makes it very quick. But I would like to commend the efforts that have been made by Pope Francis, and may I also take the opportunity to recognise the efforts that has been made by Archbishop Thomasy in his work and in his previous work also with migrants, and the very recent work of Pope Francis with Roma and Sinti and Travellers, which a number of my colleagues from Ireland participated in Rome. In my view, this convention belongs not to any of us in this room, whether we're states parties, and indeed the states parties, including your own, have taken a very particular responsibility for its implementation, but it belongs to the many people globally who experience racial discrimination in a very special way. All those states parties have the very special responsibility for its implementation. And it was very much my understanding that it was in that frame that the HolySee adopted and ratified the convention and strives to implement it. And I have to say, therefore, I was very disappointed, although I must say I was very interested in the speech this afternoon. I was very disappointed with the approach taken in the report in terms of your interpretation, which has already been very eloquently dealt with by my colleague Carlos Vasquez. In that interaction with the Catholic Church's position of global moral authority and global encouragement, I think that, as has already been pointed out, the distinct territorial limitations are not something that apply within that role. And may I say also at this stage, I'm a bit disappointed that there isn't a woman as part of your delegation. At this stage, this is a question that we raise with every delegation, and I have to say to you, I do so a bit tongue-in-cheek as well, given that at the moment there's just 3 of us sitting on the committee, but we're working hard on that as well. But within that frame, it seems to me that the points that have already been raised by Carlos with regard to intersectionality of poverty and racism, at lunchtime, I sat in Pali Nations and listened to a Yazidi woman speak about the intersectionality between racial discrimination and discrimination against the Yazidi women. I'm not saying that it wasn't racial discrimination, and you're perfectly right to say that we're not CEDA, and I always say that myself. But there is a gender dimension to racial discrimination when it's experienced by women. And I urge you and encourage you to please not deny that intersectionality. This is work in progress for all of us. It's not about making the convention different, but it's about recognizing that if you're a Yazidi woman and you're tied up in chains, and turned into a sex slave, that is different from what might happen. I'm not saying it's worse or it's better. I'm just saying it's different from what might happen to a Yazidi man in that process of racial discrimination. And I urge you to try to consider ways to acknowledge those and to acknowledge that dimension and what it actually means. Could I also say then very briefly in terms of, and I want to commend the role of the Catholic Church in education globally, and I don't make this remark from the point of view of trying to turn that around. But I think sometimes, as has already been pointed out, there can be circumstances, and in my own country, for example, when it's not a government requirement, but where admissions policies to Catholic schools could be maybe more inclusive of minorities in a way that would create conditions for a more inclusive society overall. And with regard then to some of the issues that have been raised about racism or racial discrimination by clergy, or indeed it could be sisters or members of the various institutions of the Catholic Church, I'd like to go back to what we often do on these occasions, which is to talk about education of the members, to talk about, because while I know that you don't have a role locally, and you absolutely rightly commented on that, I do know, because I also teach at a university that's associated with the Catholic Church in Maynooth in Ireland, I do know that you have a role overall with regard to the education of people who are going to become in one way or another associated with the church. And in that regard, could I ask you if you have a particular policy on the education of clergy, on the, what we call here, in-service, it's a layperson's term, for the ongoing education of people, and also the terms and conditions under which people might get promotion, which would look to how they are actually performing or how they are actually taking on board issues with regard to racial discrimination. And can I finish then by returning to points that have already been raised by my colleagues with regard to the need, the reality that you can't go back 500 years, I know, but the reality that consequences still pertain with regard to what happened then, and the particular concerns that have been raised by Indigenous people, as well as the concerns that have to be raised about the role of churches in other parts of the world, sometimes out of missionary processes, but I'm not talking about those, and you correctly said that religion is not our business, but I do think that there is a legacy sometimes of racism and of discrimination that needs to be addressed. And finally, could I make a suggestion, which is that perhaps you might consider the possibility of a national human rights institution for the Holy See, because I think, again, it could be an instrument to promote this. And I know I said finally, but there is just one other thing. I'm really disappointed at what you say about Durban in the report. I remember with great enthusiasm the support that I and others got from the Holy See delegation in Durban. And I think your role now in promoting the continuation of that work could be really important and useful, and I urge you to reconsider your position in that regard. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora Quigley.
Thank you, Ms. Quigley. And I'll give the floor to Mr. Murillo Martinez to be followed by Mr. Young. Thank you, Chairman. I, too, echo the words of welcome which have been offered to the distinguished delegation of the Holy See for the opportunity to hold this dialogue as well. I'd also like to express my particular recognition and thanks to Mr. Vasquez, my neighbour here, for his work on the report. Chairman, distinguished delegation, I think it's a truly historic moment to recognise the role which the Catholic Church played in the colonial period, and historic recognition of what went on and the injustices of the past is very important. But we also need to recognise that such injustice is sometimes perpetuated, and many consequences of that period continue to be latent today. This morning we saw a presentation here in the committee relating to the situation of stateless persons in the Dominican Republic. It gives me great sorrow to observe that, unfortunately, one of the leading individuals involved in the difficult situations which more than 200,000 Haitians find themselves in the Dominican Republic is, in fact, the Catholic Church. It has showed a great deal of resistance to having those individuals' rights recognised, and I'd like to know in what circumstances the Vatican State can contribute to improvements and revisions in the stance which is taken on such people's situations. I'd also like to place particular emphasis on the leadership which His Holiness Pope Francis has shown. He is one of the great leaders in the current time, and I would like to express my personal acknowledgement of the role which he's playing in a country such as mine, Colombia, which is making progress towards the achievement of peace. He's been very eloquent in expressing his views on that process, and in other areas such as the developments in relation to Cuba. My next question is to what extent the Catholic Church and the Vatican State, beyond the situations which I've just mentioned, which are of particular concern, can contribute positively to conveying constructive messages which may assuage the situation of victims of injustices of the past. And in a very specific way, I'd like to know whether the Vatican State may, for instance, consider the possibility that the Pope might emit papal encyclicals relating to the situation of racism and racial discrimination affecting people of African descent and indigenous people. I say that because we're currently in the midst of the decade in favour of people of African descent, and I know that papal emissions have had a great deal of positive impact in the past. The Holy Father has on a number of occasions made statements which have led to positive developments. Particular instances relating to labour rights and so on and so forth, and that those papal emissions are in fact an ideal instrument to correct errors which have been made in the past, either by the Church or by third parties. So my question is, and it's not necessarily a question to which I expect an answer immediately, I simply would respectfully ask you to consider it as a possibility. My question is how and to what extent the Church, the Vatican State, might consider the possibility of making or having the Pope make such statements relating to the decade on the people of African descent to which I'm making reference here. Pope Francis, as recently as in July, asked for forgiveness for the atrocities perpetrated against the indigenous people in Bolivia. That's just one example. Paragraph 67 of the report stresses the role of education and the media as basic vehicles for changing prejudices and eliminating racial hatred. So an encyclical could be very useful in that regard. I also want to take this opportunity, while I have the floor, to ask the distinguished delegation, and in particular Monsignor Tomasi, to pass on those thoughts. I thought it might be a good idea to have a statement about the decade on the people of African descent. And it's not the first time that I've submitted such a request. I recently submitted a similar request for a video message through my government to a representative of the Holy See, and I'm not sure whether that message reached the Pope, but I would like to ask whether that's the case. So we've been talking about historic events, and I think it would be useful to have such statements on those events as a part of a general progressive approach which we're taking in Latin America at the moment. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Murillo Martinez. Mr. Young, next, to be followed by Mr. Bossu.
Yeah. Let me join my colleagues to welcome and congratulate the distinguished delegation from the Holy See. Avail of myself this opportunity as well to thank and congratulate my colleague, Mr. Vasquez, who went so fast that I may have perhaps missed a few things which I wanted to take. So I'm not so sure whether it's not going to be a replication. But anyhow, I'll deal mainly with the administration of justice. First of all, when I have a look at paragraph 18 of your report, Archbishop, I must say that I feel jealous as a former member of the judiciary myself to see that the courts in the Vatican, they've got a rather light job. In the sense, I see that for the year 2013, they had barely 11 cases to deal with. So, but then what I see is that they dealt with 4 civil cases, 5 penal cases, and 4 penal decrees. If you could perhaps, just for my information, explain what are those penal decrees, and what are the sort of civil cases which were heard by the judiciary of Vatican. Now, my next question is about the application of canon law. Do I understand that canon law applies to the ecclesiastics, and that even if the acts and conducts happen outside Vatican, they would fall under the jurisdiction of Vatican? Now, so that if that is so, would the number of cases which I've mentioned cover everything, or is it just cases which are taken on board which happen in the Vatican? Now, then I see as well that there are 3 tribunals which have been set up, and it says on behalf of the Pope, and they exercise vicarious jurisdiction. So that I suppose that the appointing body for those persons to act as judges would be the Pope. But then I see as well that there's an office of the promoter of justice. I would be pleased if information could be given as to what that post is, the promoter of justice. Would I be right if I were to think that it was a sort of a director of public prosecutions which prosecutes the case? I'm not so sure, but I would be delighted if I could be given some information about this. Now then I see as well that paragraph 24, mention is made that the Vatican City State may request Italy to try criminal cases committed within VCS. Has this ever been done? That Italy has been requested to hear those cases. Now, I go to paragraph 30, 30, about penal canon law. Now, at 30b, it says, some of these canonical crimes or particular offenses such as homicide, theft, aggression, and sexual abuse can also trigger sanctions by the state, since the public order of civil society has also been disturbed. Now, let me suggest a case. If something were to happen, for example, in Rwanda, supposedly, let's have a case of a priest who may have engaged himself in sort of saying racist or hate speech and inciting people to commit crimes, and this is brought to the attention of the Holy See. Now, would such cases be brought and tried in the Vatican City? And if that is so, what would be the sort of consequences apart from, perhaps jobs like reprimand or being asked to leave the order, that sort of thing? But when it comes to really penal law, I know that, for example, you say that you do not have a penal system like prisons or whatever it is. So that aspect of the criminal law, what's going to happen to such persons who may commit serious crimes? So I think I would rest myself on those few points. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Young, for those questions. Mr. Bossut, you have the floor, and you'll be followed by Mr. Calaf. Thank you very much, Chairman. Chairman, I'd like to thank the delegation of the Holy See for having presented its report. I remember 14 years ago we had a similar exercise, and at that time I was a member of the committee. So I've been here for quite some time, and it's been quite some time since we have seen the Holy See delegation here before us. I'd also like to thank our colleague Mr. Vasquez for his analysis of the report. As usual, he analysed the report with gusto, and it may be the last time that he works for us as a rapporteur, which is a source of great sorrow for us. We'll miss him greatly. When we're talking about a state party to an international convention in relation to the Holy See, we need to underline the specific nature of that state party. And I think in paragraph 16 we can see what we mean by that. Mr. Vasquez made reference to this as well. The territory of the Vatican State is 44 hectares, if I'm not mistaken, so it's a very small state. The population's also very small. Mention is made here of 606 citizens, but the majority of those citizens don't even live in the Vatican State, they live abroad. Of those who do reside in the state, in the Vatican City, 239 are barely greater in number than those who don't live there. So we're talking about a very limited population indeed. I don't think the acquisition of nationality of this state works in the same way as most other states either. So all of this means that we need to distinguish the Vatican State from the Holy See. I think the Vatican City belongs to a number of conventions in technical terms relating to postal services and telecommunications, but in this case we're not dealing with the Vatican State, we're dealing with the Holy See. which is the moral and religious authority in relation to the Catholic Church and the Pope at its head. What we also need to underline is that just because the Holy See isn't a normal state, so to speak, that doesn't mean that it's not subject to international law. That's a matter which is quite separate from the sovereignty issue relating to the Vatican State. Another point which I wanted to say a few words about, and Mr. Vasquez has already mentioned this, is the interpretation of treaties. I think that the stances taken by the Holy See are shared by a number of other states party, but I'm rather surprised that such frequent mention has been made of that. Because as Mr. Vasquez said, at the end of the day, certain recommendations coming out of this committee's work may be called into question, but as is mentioned in the report, we know that our recommendations are not binding, and so they can't impose new obligations on the states parties, although of course the committee would hope that its recommendations be taken up wherever possible. So I agree with the analysis which has been carried out by Mr. Vasquez, in which he states that invoking a fundamental change in circumstances could be grounds for a change of that type. I think that's going too far, and I don't think we can go so far as to say that. Personally, I also agree with what's said in footnote 9 of the presentation of the Apostolic Nuncio. I wonder whether we really need to insist on this question. I think that's really something that goes without saying. I don't think we need to go into that in too much detail. I was also very pleased to hear what was said in the oral presentation about the key role which the Catholic Church plays in the field of education and public health. In the 2001 report, I remember a great deal of material in the report about statistics on this, and in the oral presentation today it was said that more than 200,000 schools from kindergarten to university level are in existence, which provide education to more than 64 million young people, and the majority of them are not Catholics. I think that's something which should be underscored and which reveals the openness of the Catholic Church in executing its mission in the field of education and health. Finally, Chairman, I'm very pleased to have read so much material about the genocide in Rwanda. As you may know, I have been involved in the history of Rwanda. I taught there in the 1980s, and I've always been very attentive to what's been going on there. And the genocide in 1994 was a tragedy without equal. This didn't happen in the 15th century. It was something that took place 21 years ago. At least 10,000 people were massacred every day with machetes for a period of almost 100 days, and that was really a dreadful crime and an unprecedented tragedy. Unfortunately, certain members of the Catholic Church and some members of the church hierarchy in Rwanda were involved in that because they were so close to the regime which practiced ethnic discrimination and became one which imparted genocide. And so I don't think it's inappropriate for us to make so much mention of that matter, though I'd also like to underscore that the Apostolic Nuncio at the time, Monsignor Bertello, who is now Cardinal Bertello, I think played a very significant role at that time. He was Apostolic Nuncio from 1990 to 1994, and he was well abreast of what was going on in the country.
Perhaps, Mr. Chairman, I could use this opportunity to ask the delegation if they could shed some more light for us on the position of the Burundi Council of Bishops. It's a neighbouring country to Rwanda, as you know, but we often say that they are twin countries, Burundi and Rwanda. We know the situation in Burundi currently is one that gives rise to serious concern, so I think it would be useful for us to hear from you what the position of the Holy See is on this and what the Episcopal Conference of Burundi is on the extremely worrying situation that is gripping Burundi today. That's all I wanted to say, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you, Monsieur Bossut. Mr. Kalaf, you have the floor, after whom we will hear Mr. Kamal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to join my colleagues in welcoming in our midst the delegation of the Holy See and thanking the delegation for the report as well as for the oral presentation we've heard this afternoon. Mr. Vasquez, of course, did excellent work, detailed research he carried out in analyzing the situation, work we're accustomed to from him. In looking at your report, I was somewhat perplexed. What perplexed me was the legal aspect of the ratification of our convention. Now, as Monsieur Bossuet has just clarified, it is the Holy See that ratified our convention. And we see that, according to the oral presentation that Monsignor Tomasi gave us, we need to distinguish the Holy See from the Vatican City State. Now, in that respect, the state only came into existence in 1929, and of course, with St. Peter, the Holy See has existed for a lot longer than that. Now, these matters are very complicated, especially when the Holy See ratifies with a double system in play. You have the state system on the one hand, and we, the jurists and members of the committee, we are shackled by what we know from the principles stemming from positive law, stemming from day-to-day civil law. And at the same time, in parallel, we see that there is another system coming into play, which gives personal competence to the Pope and his personal hierarchy. Now, these two systems running in parallel never meet, or they only meet right at the top in the person of the Pope. Now, the question is, the Pope who has signed our convention. Now, so we are perplexed, we're bewildered, because we need to deal with the state party, but it is the Holy See covering both, namely the state party with a territorial attribution and also in parallel a personal attribution which goes right up to the Pope. So at first reading I was bewildered, but at my second reading I would say that I found my bearings again. That's how I put it. I found my bearings. Now, the territorial attribution issue should limit our focus just to the Vatican, wherein around 600,000 live. And of course, we shouldn't go beyond that, because these are just moral declarations being established thereover. But we know that the world's hope is vested in what is said by the Pope. And if we bear that in mind, we would say that we stand side by side with you to see how we can together defend the values which our convention enshrines and which the Holy See could uphold for the well-being of this world that waits in the throes of distress and discrimination to see how we can move forward. And it is thus in this context that our dialogue should take place. I don't have a specific question to put to you, but I'd like to know what your reading is of this personal attribution. Now, in your opening statement, we were delighted to hear that over 215,000 schools have been set up by Catholic authorities, providing education to 64 million young people. Now, I know that these schools are not merely open to Catholics, because I went to one and I'm not a Catholic, so I know that they are not discriminatory in nature. 5,000 hospitals, 16,000 dispensaries, etc. Your figures are very welcome, and I would say that you have the ear of the people you deal with and care for. But beyond that, as you also say in paragraph 30D of your report, 30D, you also take measures under canon criminal law, which you can use to prosecute the people which fall under your jurisdiction when they cannot be prosecuted by national law. Now, I'm trying to walk with you, hand in hand with you, along this path that would enable us to understand what you mean by personal attribution and canon law. Now, if there is a discrimination that somebody is a victim of in one of your institutions, or if a person over whom you have authority is a victim of discrimination, my question to you is this: can you apply the censure penalties or the other penalties that are available to you over these persons under the convention? That's my question. That's the question to which I would like to have an answer. In other words, with the values you uphold and with the values that are enshrined in our convention and which you have ratified, can we go that far? And I'd be delighted if I could have an answer to that question. There's a second question I'd like to put to you, which has been troubling me. We know full well that in the Catholic bodies, the judicial bodies that implement canon law, now in your institutions that apply canon law, and I'd like to refer to paragraph 30E, these bodies implement procedures under canon law, but these procedures are not open to the public or not available to the public. Now, I understand that that could be because there is a concern for confidentiality or reserve, but this procedure not available to the public, could it be if the culprit, so to speak, asks for it to be available? Is it possible, or would it be possible for there to be adversarial proceedings to be brought within that context and before Vatican courts? It is something I would be grateful if you could dwell upon to see what happens on the ground in the Vatican, and to see whether the Holy See can really fulfill the expectations that people have vested in it. And I believe that today humanity is seeking how to eradicate all forms of discrimination in the world and uphold respect for diversity. Thank you.